Good evening and welcome to our program tonight, celebrating 500 years of Ignatian Women on Mission. My name is Kathy Maher, and I'm here at St. Ignatius of Loyola Church on the campus of Boston College in Chestnut Hill. Thank you all for joining us, and it is also my pleasure to welcome so many of you from Jesuit apostolates on the East Coast and as far away as Colombia. We are also grateful for the grant support from the Jesuits USA East Province for this program. During the evening, please feel free to enter any questions you might have for our conversation time using the question and answer function located on the bottom panel of your screen. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Rosemary DeJulio. Rosemary is joining us tonight from New York, where she was born and raised in the Bronx, only a few blocks from Fordham University. She earned double RAM status, earning both her master's and doctoral degrees from Fordham. Rosemary retired after a 36-year-long career on Fordham's campuses, where she served as assistant dean at Fordham College, associate dean at Marymount, and special assistant to the president at Rose Hill. And along with her administrative leadership, mentoring, and advising faculty and students, Rosemary shares tonight from her expertise in early modern European history and her doctoral research focused on the history of women's participation in Ignatian spirituality and pedagogy. Another important part of her life for over 40 years has been her mission, along with her husband, Tom, to serve with Kiwanis International. Retirement has found her traveling worldwide on behalf of Kiwanis and its partner UNICEF in the effort to reduce maternal and neonatal tetanus that afflicts women and their infants in impoverished regions of the world. Thank you for being with us this evening, Rosemary. And at this time, I would also like to introduce our panelists who will guide us in reflection and conversation. Clare Walsh is a mission helper of the Sacred Heart. She graduated from Western Jesuit School of Theology and is offered ministry as the Director of Pastoral Care at Tufts University. Clare served with 3 provincials as the New England Jesuit Provincial Assistant for Ignatian Spirituality and was on the founding staff of the Jesuit Collaborative. For 8 years, she served on the leadership team for her community and now works with the Mission Helpers Advancement Team, doing fundraising for women refugees living with the congregation. Clare has taught spiritual direction at the Center for Religious Development and currently teaches a spiritual direction practicum at the School of Theology and Ministry here at Boston College. Along with her deep experience in formation, Clare continues to accompany and renew so many through her ministry of spiritual direction and the giving of retreats, including the long retreat of the spiritual exercises. Ellie Hidalgo is joining us from Miami, where she co-directs Discerning Deacons, a new project to contribute to the Catholic Church's discernment about admitting women to the permanent diaconate and creating a more synodal, listening, participatory church. Previously, she served as a pastoral associate at Dolores Mission Church and School, a Jesuit parish in the Latin American immigrant community of Boyle Heights, Los Angeles. This small church with a giant heart is known for its restorative justice ministries and faith-based community organizing, and for being the home parish of Homeboy Industries. Ellie holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's in pastoral theology from Loyola Marymount University. Father Paul Harman is joining us from his residence close by at the St. Peter Faber Jesuit community in Brighton. Father Paul's ministry there is currently focused on supporting Jesuit scholastics in spiritual direction and accompanying men and women in the spiritual exercises and on retreats. Father Harman has had extensive experience in higher education and Jesuit apostolates. He has served as vice president for mission and executive vice president at the College of the Holy Cross. He was the provincial assistant for formation for the New England province of the Jesuits and served as secretary for formation for the Jesuits in the United States. Throughout his career, Father Harman has warmly welcomed women into Ignatian mission, mentoring and inspiring women in Ignatian leadership, partnership, and service. And Meg Fox Kelly is joining us from the Worcester area, where she has served as a chaplain at the College of the Holy Cross since 2005. Meg directs the retreat program, which offers a diversity of retreat experiences to students, faculty, and alumni, including the spiritual exercises. In addition, Meg provides pastoral counseling and ministry and facilitates the LGBTQ+ group for students. Meg is a Holy Cross graduate and received her Master's of Divinity from the Weston School of Theology in Cambridge. Meg is also engaged in the ministry of parenting and is busy, I am sure, transitioning her 3 sons back to school. Thank you for joining us at this busy time when you are also welcoming hundreds of students back to campus. Thank you all. And at this time, I invite Dr. DeJulio to share with us tonight.
Good evening, all. I wish to thank Kathy Maher, everyone at Boston College Office of Ignatian Spirituality, for their kind invitation to be a part of this panel tonight and to be able to share my thoughts with all of you. I look forward to learning and hearing from our other panelists, as well as from those in the audience gathered virtually and spiritually this evening. Stories can be forgotten if they are not told and retold. Each time they are told, we can learn and share something different. And those of us who believe strongly in lifelong learning will keep Helen Keller's famous quote in mind when she said, "A well-educated mind will always have more questions than answers." I'm sure those words will ring true this evening. Voices of women are integral to Ignatian spirituality, and those voices in history, the stories of women, are not easily discovered, if they can be found at all. And so, identifying and hearing the voices of Ignatian women is what I would like to share with you. But before I venture back 5 centuries, let me first express my gratitude to Fordham, to the Jesuit University of New York, as it's often referred, where I was graciously welcomed for 37 years. And throughout this period, I was fortunate to have the encouragement of Jesuit teachers and mentors and supervisors to help me discover and underscore women's voices. All have given me the priceless gift of the Ignatian spirit. To say the very least, being led by the spiritual exercises was transforming, as well as my being invited to present my doctoral research to a live audience at a conference on the Ratio Studiorum more than 20 years ago. The fact that I was the only woman presenter at the time, along with one woman respondent, was both daunting and empowering and fulfilling. This would not have happened but for the generous and other directed nature of 2 special women mentors, now deceased, who witnessed firsthand my transition from a student of late Renaissance and Reformation history to a collaborative partner in Ignatian spirituality. The gifts they imparted were the inspiration I needed to advise and encourage other colleagues and students to pursue similar topics and degrees in the field of both Catholic leadership and Catholic education. My lifelong curiosity and love of history fueled my desire to step back in time, to revisit the past so that I could be better located in the present. History, or shall I say, her story, was out there, but I believe it wasn't told and examined often enough. It's the right time for us now to lean in, to re-examine, to explain, and more deeply understand women's roles in this special 500-year Ignatian celebration. So now let's journey for the short time we have together to a broader awareness of women and the roles they played in shaping Ignatian spirituality. I don't think it's a secret that Jesuit schools are still grappling with mission and identity. The words Ignatian and Jesuit are frequently used interchangeably in connection with the description of Jesuit schools. And the phrase men and women for others, now more often expressed as women and men for others, appear in most faculty recruitment and admissions materials. But because the Jesuits remain an all-male society, more women rightly question and want more clarity about what roles they play in advancing the Ignatian mission and identity. In this Ignatian year, the roles women played during Ignatius's lifetime and the history of Ignatian spirituality and pedagogy are timely topics. I believe women, more than ever before, who are collaborating with Jesuits in greater numbers in higher education and ministry, will find it helpful, if not required, to procure a more precise understanding of how they've been connected historically with St. Ignatius. They can begin by learning about the women who were his contemporaries in the 16th century and the forms of collaboration women and Ignatius's followers had in the centuries that followed. Historically, women were very much connected to the spirituality of St. Ignatius, and that is best revealed in the spiritual exercises. I contend that it is these exercises which led women to become patrons, pupils, and partners of Jesuits through the centuries. Of course, we know that women had varied and evolving roles in what was a patriarchal and misogynist society. Most, if not all, accounts of women were written by men, and sadly, far too little has been written in recent years on the topic of Ignatius and women, which in today's modern culture could possibly conjure up a negative image and a skewed understanding of the historical facts. This prompts us to ask what sources are available to make a more creative use of relatively few historical accounts. For example, I think we can start by improving what is said in most biographies of Ignatius, that he was given a book on the life of Christ and the lives of the saints while convalescing from the shot of the cannonball. Well, who gave this book to him, especially if it is believed to be the initial spark that began turning Ignatius's self-serving gallantry into his other directed service? What do we say, what do we know about the woman who gave him the life-changing book to read? Magdalena de Arios y Loyola, the wife of Ignatius's oldest brother Martin, was a pious and a cultured woman of the Spanish court of Isabella, who assumed the matriarchal responsibilities of the Loyola homestead upon the death of Ignatius's mother when he was just a little boy. It was to this homestead that he returned after his injury, and to Magdalena, this woman who was like a second mother. Do we give proper attention, attribution, and thanks to her for igniting that spark which led Ignatius on a journey that changed millions of lives over the centuries? Ignatius himself identified these two readings as the starting point of his new life, his conversion. Similarly, have we expanded our awareness and knowledge of the extant letters written by Ignatius to women and women's responses to him that were published in a work called Letters to Women by Hugo Rahner 60 years ago. Hugo was the older brother of Karl, whose works admittedly are more readily read and sourced in Jesuit circles. But without a new edition of the elder Rahner's publication, are we missing an opportunity to learn more about the women who were first attracted to Ignatian spirituality in its earliest stages of development? And equally important, how can we use this primary source of letters to discover what later generations of women did to adapt the Ignatian mission of educating others, saving souls, and creating their own educational apostolate for young women? As many of you know from reading these letters in preparation for this conversation this evening, they can hold a key to our understanding the evolving discourse between Ignatius and women. Indeed, Ignatius's sharing of these blossoming spiritual ideas with women enabled him to discover and discern more about himself as he journeyed away from the life of the courtier to become the pilgrim, the founder of the Society of Jesus. Should his letters be dismissed because they contain the male-oriented language of the 16th century? Shouldn't we read them to go beyond the written word of a soldier to reveal more about the woman who influenced the future saint? We also have other documents to help us understand women's roles in the spiritual exercises, especially the Ratio Studiorum, which is the Jesuit educational treatise on pedagogy. The extant writings of women who were foundresses of religious orders for women not only reveal how much the Ignatian educational mission was advanced by women, but also gives historical grounding for the motto, Women for Others. Focusing on Ignatius's life in the years following the convalescence from the cannonball, we can learn about the women of his time who influenced and advanced his own conversion and spiritual development. We recall Ignatius's spiritual journey that placed him before the altar of the Black Virgin at Montserrat, where he turned away from the temporal king he previously defended, surrendered his sword, and pledged himself to the eternal king, Jesus. We have accounts of his traveling down the mountainside toward Manresa, originally intending to stay there only a few weeks. He remained there for almost a year. Why? Who did he meet on this journey? In Manresa, Ignatius met Inez, in some circles she's called Agnes, Pascual, among the first women to befriend Inigo, as Ignatius started calling himself. She provided the pilgrim with shelter and food, but is that all? In the letters compiled by Ronner, we're able to discern that he began to share his own conversion, his own feelings of things spiritual with Inez and her circle of friends, who by some accounts identify themselves as Inigas. Indeed, a letter to Inez is among the very first extant ones that survive. Other women entered his life during and after his time in Manresa. They were predominantly the wealthy and influential women who became enthralled by his teaching and who wanted to connect more directly to his spirituality and in turn to their own sense of freedom of expression. With limited time tonight, let me offer just a few of the names of these women and briefly summarize how their lives were intertwined with the future saint. The story of Isabel Roser is passionate and bold, one that I can see worthy of becoming the basis for a novel or a TV movie even. Isabel was a primary benefactress of Ignatius's formal education when he was afforded the opportunity to study in Salamanca and the University of Paris. Significantly, Isabel dared to cross the line from just being a patron to being a partner by attempting to become a Jesuit. The story of Isabel and her two female companions, Isabel de Hosas and Francesca de Cruillas, and her out-of-the-box idea of taking vows as a Jesuit is a story filled with serious accusations, deep emotional conflict for Ignatius that actually culminated in an almost lawsuit. Isabel's correspondence with Ignatius not only reveals the tensions created by a woman daring to push the envelope in times when spiritual women were restricted and cloistered, but it also introduces us to the nature, the character, and yes, the weakness of Ignatius. The story does have a happy ending though, with a full reconciliation between the two correspondents occurring before Isabel's death. As he traveled through Alcalá and Salamanca, Ignatius was jailed for sharing his spiritual views. We know the names of two women, Maria de la Flor and Mencia Benavente, who were the ones with the courage to come forward to offer testimony that ultimately proved favorable to Ignatius's defense and his release from jail. Maria and Mencia testify that Ignatius conveyed his spiritual thoughts, his prayer-based exercises, the importance of discerning spirits, and thus he recreated their lives. And then, of course, there's Juana, the regent of Spain, the princess who lived and died as a Jesuit, albeit a concealed one. Juana may have been the only female to attain the title of Jesuit scholastic and remain one, using the pseudonym Mateo Sanchez. So how did Juana succeed when Isabel Roser failed? The simple answer may be that Juana had the money and the political clout of the most powerful empire in the world, at the time led by her father, the Emperor Charles V, and her brother, King Philip II. Perhaps we can say Ignatius was the example for today's development officers in Jesuit schools. He knew how to use powerful contacts, such as those of the Spanish Empire, to further the society of Jesus for the greater glory of God. In my opinion, A less cynical and more complex story can be revealed in the mystery of the exercises, which, when shared with Wanner, empowered the princess in a remarkably new way. The story of Teresa Regidella of the convent of Santa Clara in Barcelona can tell us much about Jesuits who were always known to be on the move. Teresa pleaded with Ignatius until her death, begging him to take on the task of reforming her nunnery and place her and her sisters under his care. Ignatius and his followers, however, refused to be responsible for women religious, and he predicated his answer to the well-documented mantra that Jesuits always had to be on the move, whereas women religious, they had to be cloistered. One might speculate that he used that as a convenient excuse to hide his fear that a newly created order of men might be jeopardized by scandal if Jesuits became too close to women religious. So perhaps we can now add the title of public relations officer to the vita of our beloved saint. Well, regardless of how we judge his motives, the letter written by Ignatius to Teresa, found in Ronner's compilation, is a must-read in light of tonight's topic. I repeat, a must-read. I say that it not only reflects the movement of women's singular role as patron toward the more consequential role of partner, but it's a pivotal moment in the development of the exercises because he revealed to Teresa in writing his own plan and purpose for his exercises. Maria Frassone del Gesso, Ferrara, Italy, shifted the role of patron and benefactress to another level when she became a college foundress. She single-handedly funded the Jesuit college in Ferrara, never receiving full recognition. Eventually, she was named a foundress of merit, but the local duke was awarded the official title of founder. Another woman influential in very similar circumstances was Leonor de Vega Osorio. She was integral in establishing a college in Sicily. So Maria and Leonor helped set in motion the idea that women can adopt the Jesuit apostolate of education to help the Jesuits establish colleges that ultimately became models for others. No study of Ignatius and the influence he had over women is complete without learning more about the educational apostolates for young women. Indeed, in the centuries following Ignatius's death, the lives and experiences of Anne de Saintonge, Mary Ward, Madeline Sophie Barrett, countless other women who received the spiritual exercises from Jesuits, from relatives who were Jesuits, highlight the fact that women possess the capacity to do for young girls what Jesuits were doing for the young men in their schools. Their schools mingled the character formation with a humanistic education that was based in many, many ways on the ratio. With varying degrees of success, independence, and acceptance, women religious seized upon the personal freedom they discovered in their participation in the spiritual exercise and established an educational apostolate for young women, demonstrating their own desire to integrate Ignatian spirituality and education. Let me conclude with a few thoughts, 3 takeaways about where we might go from here during this Ignatian year. We need to ask how we can help our Jesuit brothers move their thinking forward on how women can be more than just generous patrons and pupils paying tuition, but more complete collaborators and partners in fulfillment of the Ignatian mission. First, the document entitled Jesuits in the Situation of Women in Church and Civil Society, also known as Decree 14, was promulgated at the 34th General Congregation in Rome over a quarter century ago. I want to believe that its authors intended it to be more than just an apology to women. Rather, it was the start for a blueprint for change and rethinking of women's roles as partners and collaborators in both the Society of Jesus and in the church itself. Some may see this as mere tokenism, but whether you agree or disagree that Decree 14 went far enough, at least let's take a closer look at it in the context of today's dynamics and the ever-expanding roles of women now in Jesuit institutions and ministries. In light of that, let's also note that this past March, Arturo Sosa, the Superior General of the Jesuits, has established the Worldwide Commission on the Role and Responsibilities of Women in the Society. Second, Jesuits need not fear working more closely with women to harvest the important spiritual and educational contributions that they can make to the Jesuit mission. Historically, Ignatius grew spiritually by communicating with women in an open and free manner about all things spiritual. Jesuits today should continue their patron saint's legacy of engaging in more open and trusting conversations with women that will enliven Ignatian spirituality and make it more accessible and relevant to women. A culture of awareness and recognition of women's contributions is paramount to this journey we are all on this evening. And finally, more and more, I hope many more women should renew and enliven their own interest in the hidden stories of the women who were moved spiritually by Jesuits to acts of service, devotion, and collaboration. Today's women working, studying, spiritual advising in Jesuit institutions need to know more about how their foremothers, those who labored hard and oftentimes without credit, to achieve the magis in everything they attempted. In this Ignatian year, let's discuss these women and the ways to ensure more women will transition from their roles as patrons, pupils, to active and recognized collaborators and partners. In conclusion, Ignatius's vision gives us freedom, the powerful freedom of imagination and of spirit, freedom to hope, to dream, to be more, to do more, to achieve the magis, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us, who follow us, and who ultimately will serve others. Ad majorem Dei gloriam. Thank you. I can't.
Thank you, Dr. DeJulio. At this time, we're going to transition to our speakers on our panel. And first, they will each offer some reflection, and then we'll open our conversation. Thank you, Clare Walsh, for beginning.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. Every time I think that my feistiness is lying dormant, someone like Rosemary comes along and stirs my heart again, and I realize that I'm as feisty as ever. The cynical part of me is tempted to say, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Just as it has been up to women to give voice to the story of those who unnamed companions of Jesus, those who accompanied Jesus, it seems it is up to women now to tell the stories of the many women who partnered, not just patrons, many women who partnered. I loved when Rosemary used that word in numerous ways with Ignatius. And I'm particularly grateful to Rosemary for doing just that tonight. We need to tell the story of women. What drew these women to Ignatius? Women don't simply go around giving money to men. That's not in our nature. I've never done it. Something or someone drew them. What's the backstory? What nudged them? What were their hearts yearning for? And we should ask that questions of ourselves too, or we will become the women who are unmentioned later on. What are our desires? What draws us to Ignatius? I belong to a perfectly wonderful group of women who I'm very happy with. I have no desire to be a Jesuit, but I am very drawn to Ignatian spirituality. So we also need to tell our own story of what draws us to the gifts of Ignatius. I was I am well aware that Ignatius is, as you are too, that Ignatius is not Jesus. But I am forever, and Ignatius never claimed to be. He always pointed us toward Jesus. He never tried to, in any way, be the focus. I am forever grateful, though, to Ignatius for providing me with access to Jesus. Ignatius helped me to trust my own experience of God at a time when our church and our society did not and does not trust women's experience. And perhaps without intending to, Ignatius showed me that we can disagree with another person's opinion. We can disagree with their doctrine, but we cannot disagree with their experience. And to this day, for me, one of the greatest gifts the exercise offers, perhaps to women in particular, is coming to trust our own experience of God. Listening to Rosemary, I was struck that the exercises were never intended to be inherited. The exercises were entrusted. Material wealth is inherited. Cherished wealth is entrusted. It is turned over for care. And we're part of that care. We all know from experience that the exercises call us to a deeper intimacy with Jesus. And women know how to do that. We know how to do friendship. We know how to look on another person with love. We know how to listen to the story. We know how to be tender-hearted. We know how to ask questions that are invitational. We know how to suffer with. We know how to rejoice. We may need the language to be adapted, or we may need the exercises we're invited to contemplate to be updated, or the women in scripture to be brought to life, or at least acknowledged. But the essence is there. And surely we need to and want to look at issues such as literal translation of the exercises, issues of gendered communication, issues of embodiment of what penance and sacrifice look like through a women's lens, what self-image looks like, not to make the exercises acceptable, not to water them down, but rather so women can in truth encounter the Jesus that calls us forth. We somehow need to be heard speaking a language of abundance, not scarcity. We have something to bring to the exercises, and that needs to be celebrated. But first we need to recognize it ourselves. And before I pass the baton, the last thing I would want to say about from what Rosemary was saying, in Ignatius's autobiography and in the letters, Ignatius is often found, is often found heard saying after writing the exercises for the remainder of his life, when he's questioned about his apostolic vision, he often responds by saying, something happened to me at Manresa. Well, something happened to us at Manresa, whatever our Manresa is. And we need to be in touch with and able to articulate what happened to us at Manresa. And then I think we can help offer this experience of who we fell in love, how we fell in love with Jesus to the women and men that we so want to share this experience. And I'll pass the baton to Ellie.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Claire. And Rosemary, I'm so glad that you mentioned Magdalena de Arauz. It brought me back to having attended an 8-day Ignatian silent retreat at the Jesuit Retreat Center in Los Altos, and I'm perusing the library and found the spiritual exercises reclaimed, uncovering liberating possibilities for women. And in that book, it was the first time I ever heard her mentioned. And that was a game changer for me. That was like, oh my goodness, women, didn't come hundreds of years later or just coming now. We were there from the beginning, helping to spark St. Ignatius's conversion. And so for me, that was very profound. I've held on to her name whenever I have wondered how much do I belong here? in the Jesuit world, in Ignatian spirituality, and her memory and her impact lets me know, oh yes, we belong completely. We are an integral part of just, Jesuit spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, and the Society of Jesus's impact in the world. So, and thank you for sharing her name.
Oh, good.
I had the great grace of working for 12 years at Dolores Mission Church in East Los Angeles, and it was staffed by the Jesuits, and there was very much a collaborative spirit among the Jesuits and the laity, particularly lay mothers and grandmothers, who really were often the engine of discerning the ministries that we were going to engage in. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about discernment, because that has been something about Ignatian spirituality that has very much influenced my life, and it influenced the parish and the work that I'm doing now, which is this idea that God is constantly in dialogue with us and trying to guide us in terms of what's the next step. And oftentimes at Dolores Mission, we were in all our different kinds of meetings, we were asking ourselves, what are the pressing needs in our community? And what would Jesus do? Which was a way of asking ourselves, if we were to move out of fear and into prophetic action, what might we consider doing? And often another way of rephrasing that question is, how is God inviting my best self to respond? My best self, again, the one that can move out of fear or powerlessness and into courageous action, or how is our best selves being invited to respond? And so one of the things that I wanted to mention is that discernment, especially communal discernment, often invites us to listen to people who might otherwise be excluded. So at Dolores Mission, in the heart of an immigrant community, it was often the undocumented mother of 5 children who could most crystallize the pressing needs in the community, and how might our church respond. It was the formerly incarcerated young man or woman looking for a second chance at a job and a new start, who could communicate how we were being invited to respond. It was someone without a home who's seeking shelter and is daring us as a church to imagine offering shelter and offering food and responding, with that great of a generosity. So just to mention for a couple of minutes, the project I'm engaged in now is called Discerning Deacons. I moved to Miami during the pandemic to be closer to family, and got involved with this, I'm helping to co-direct with Casey Stanton, this project to engage Catholics in the active discernment of our church about women in the diaconate. And it's a live conversation with a papal commission and a discussion among bishops. But again, Discerning Deacons, we named ourselves that way on purpose in order to engage all the faithful, so that the faithful can also contribute to the church's discernment. Because when we ask ourselves, how does the church discern a new thing? How do we discern the movement of the Holy Spirit calling us to something more? And so just to share for a minute, what we did this summer is we began by listening to women's stories who are potentially discerning a call to the diaconate. And then this summer we listened to 1,500 people in 20 different cities who wanted to engage in the conversation. And we're gathering the fruits and putting that together in a report. But I wanted to mention this spirituality of listening, because our Jesuit Pope, Pope Francis, is about to inaugurate a synod on a global synod on the topic of synodality, and is encouraging all of us to really take this time to consult with the church broadly and to listen deeply to one another, and to invite God and the Holy Spirit into that process of discernment as to what are we being invited to do next as a church. And again, that discernment requires listening to people on the margins, listening to people on the peripheries, in order to really move courageously into the church of the third millennium. So I just wanted to mention that because I feel hopeful that now, in our polarized times, I would say, where the church is divided in many ways and society is divided in many ways, our Jesuit Pope is asking this question: can we learn how to listen to one another authentically, with compassion, with mutual respect? Can we learn how to build consensus? And I think that this is potentially something very important, where Ignatian spirituality can have a very important impact on the world, of showing us a pathway of listening and building consensus and moving out of polarization. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie. Now I invite Father Paul.
First of all, my thanks to Rosemary. I could listen to you for much longer, and I mean that, and learn. You have both mentioned Magdalena. You can imagine my surprise as a young Jesuit to read that so strong was the emotion that Ignatius still felt for Magdalena years later, that he had in his breviary a holy card of the Blessed Mother, but the artist, the rendering of the Blessed Mother reminded him so much of his sister-in-law that he would have to cover it over sometimes. It was just that strong for him. So talk about influence. Yes, indeed. I think it's difficult for us to imagine how in the century in which Ignatius came into existence, and in the culture in which he came to existence, how exuberant that culture was at the time, with people both in religious life, but also laymen and women, and especially women, who had visions, who gave expression to what they saw and felt. Rosemary knows, of course, of the Beatas. And when Ignatius was in Manresa, and this is always, every time I read the autobiography or the so-called autobiography of Ignatius, it always strikes me that a woman who goes unnamed, but who was clearly well known, so well known that the king knew of her, and Ignatius mentions that, she called out to Ignatius. She said, may Jesus show his face to you. He never forgot that. And he found her, probably of all his contacts, he found her the person that he wanted to learn from. Her name lost apparently to history, unless Rosemary wants to correct me, but I don't think we know her name. But a powerful, powerful influence. I'm so glad she mentioned the women that she did. I have a question, perhaps to Rosemary, you might know the answer to that. I'm curious that Ignatius so easily befriended women companions in Manresa, and then later on in Salamanca and Alcalá and so forth. He had difficulty at first attracting male companions. They would come, but they didn't necessarily stay very long. I think that's something to think about.
It is.
His first real companions obviously came when he was in Paris,
Right.
Peter Faber and Xavier. I have been wondering, in thinking about tonight's discussion, how interesting it would be if more women knew or learned from Jesuits who the women authors are today, spiritual writers, poets, novelists, that I know personally have greatly influenced me. And I know many, many Jesuits who could give their list of women. I think that would be a fascinating compilation to hear about, to discuss, and to learn from. That's very uppermost in my mind. I also think it's important to remember, and again, I'd appreciate any comments Rosemary would want to make. In Ignatius's time, to give spiritual direction was a very different thing from what it is now. It was much more formal and much more a matter of time. A fair amount of time had to be given to it. I'm not making excuses for Ignatian not wanting to take on the direction of convents and women, but it would have been I think it might have been a distraction myself to him. I don't know what you think of that. As you know, both in the United States and in Venezuela, above all, there have been very dramatic instances of cooperation and of inviting women into partnership in our works. The story in Venezuela, to the best of my knowledge, has not been well told. I believe it still goes on, but not many people know about it. Father Sosa certainly knows about it, our general. And as you know, in this country, we had an experiment, if you wanted to call it that, in what was then the Wisconsin province of lay partnership and so forth. It was an experiment. There are things to learn from I think there, and maybe that can be part of the commission now that Father Sosa's setting up. I want to thank all my fellow panelists, because I've just from listening to you, Kathy and Ellie, and I know Meg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Meg.
So I also echo so much of what everyone has said. Just deep gratitude, Rosemary, for your reflection. I found myself scribbling notes as you were speaking and wanting to hold on to everything you were talking about. And we'll share with the students here at Holy Cross.
Please.
I love that idea of sharing who gave Ignatius those books. It's a part of the story that I haven't told before when I invite students to think about Ignatius. So thank you for that. I just wanted to talk quickly about 3 gifts of Ignatian spirituality that for me in the church, as a woman doing ministry in the church, have been really important to my own life, but also to my ministry. And the first is the principle and foundation. I was first introduced to the exercises as a sophomore at Holy Cross in the mid-1990s when I made the 5-day adaptation of the exercises. And I wish I could say I went because I had a deep calling or a prayerful experience to go. I went because 2 of my older sisters who were alums of Holy Cross went on this retreat and said, you have to make the exercises. So I did. I was a dutiful younger sister and went on them. During the first night of the retreat, I found myself cursing my sisters, saying, what did they sign me up for? Because I had no idea what this experience was going to be like. I remained on retreat. And on the first night, a Jesuit, Father Lebrun, who was giving the retreat, invited all the participants that evening to go into their rooms and look in the mirror and to see themselves as people created and loved by God. It seemed like a really easy exercise for me to do on that first night, to see myself as a person loved and created by God. But it was actually transformational because it was the first time that I could actually think about that relationship with God as mine, as a God who was actively present in my life. That God who created me at that time continues to create and recreate me even today. At 19 years old, that was a really powerful image of God, a God who was actively present in my life. So the exercise of looking in the mirror and seeing myself and naming my own giftedness and uniqueness is something that continues to challenge me 20 plus years later, but it's a real gift of Ignatian spirituality that I hold on to. The second is this idea in the exercises that Ignatius talks about the creator dealing directly with the creature. In 2003, I was in my 3rd year of my MDiv program in Cambridge when the sex abuse scandal broke in Boston. And it was a really difficult time for many, in particular for me as a lay woman in ministry. I was embarrassed, ashamed, angry at the church, by the institution that I so deeply loved, that I committed my life to, that hurt me in a very deep way. During that same year, I was also writing a theological synthesis, and I had chosen to focus on the scripture passage in John 19, verse 25 to 27, in which the women stand at the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
Everyone else left, and the only people that remained were the women standing there with the body of Jesus. As I reflected back on the experience in 2003, the grief, pain, and anger that I held towards the church, there are bits of it that still remain in my heart. Yet it was during this time, and it continues to be during now, that I held on to Ignatius's notion of the creator dealing directly with the creature. Because this idea of God dealing and engaging directly with me has helped me as I've navigated ministry in the church, in a church that often dismisses my voice as a woman. My ministry, my vocation is rooted in a deep and felt knowledge that God has called me to do this work and continues to call me to do it. So the creator deals directly with the creature. I can remain with the women at the foot of the cross with a great sense of admiration for them and a trust in the women that remain at the foot of the cross today. The clericalism and patriarchy present within our church is difficult and painful, yet I remain trusting the creator who's called me to do this work. And the last gift, I think, of Ignatian spirituality for me is this ideal of finding God in all things. This has shaped my experience of God in profound ways, particularly as a mother of 3 young boys, ages 13, 11, and 9. Life can be chaotic at times. However, experiencing the world through the lens of Ignatian spirituality has given me the gift of noticing and seeing God in all things. It's often in the quiet of the night when my kids are settled in bed and I can think back upon my day when I notice where God was. That God has been trying to get my attention, as Ellie talked about. God has been trying to get my attention all throughout the day if I just notice. I can experience God in the intense hug that my 9-year-old Connor loves to give me every time he sees me. I can experience God in the reaching out of Sean's hand to touch my neck as he falls asleep to make sure I'm still there. And I can notice God in my oldest son, Kieran's curiosity and his resiliency. So even in the chaos, God is still present, still trying to get my attention. So these 3 themes, finding God in all things, the creator dealing directly with the creature, and the awareness of our own uniqueness and our own giftedness, has really helped me in my own life as a minister in the church, but also as a person of faith. So thank you, Rosemary, for inspiring me even more to continue this ministry in the church. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your reflection. And we have time for a few questions from our participants tonight. One participant asks, and I offer this to all of you for your comments. Women have been instrumental in forming Jesuit and lay persons for ministry. How can this be more intentional going forward? Any thoughts or comments? I think the participant is noting that this is something that already is, and how can we grow it? How can we continue to involve women in forming persons for ministry, both lay and Jesuit?
I think having more panels like this would obviously help. And I also think, just from speaking of, Jesuit higher ed, I think it would help to have some sort of a seminar on all things Ignatian as you bring folks in, as you hire folks. I noticed that a number of women and men at Fordham, when they were coming on board, of course, you have to look at their backgrounds, what they've published recently, et cetera, but they also need to have that component of passion for the mission of the university. And I think that needs to be stressed a little bit more. And I think if it is, then I think it would set a good example for anyone that might be interested in participating in the ministry of the Ignatian ministry, the Jesuit ministry. I think it would help.
Thank you, Rosemary. And certainly part of formation is mentoring. And tonight we're celebrating both the women and Jesuits who have mentored and inspired us and been part of our own formation. Many of you have spoken about this upcoming commission, and this participant has a question for all of us. How might the new commission on the role and responsibilities of women in the Society of Jesus, organized by Father General Sosa last March, be different from the General Congregation 34, Decree 14, which looked at the place of women in Jesuit mission and work for social justice? That took place in 1995. What have we seen and not seen in the last 25 years?
My suspicion, and you're listening to an old man now, my suspicion is that we're going to have younger and newer voices speak to that commission with much more recent experience and in one sense, much more pressing energy and concern to do something. So I think it will be different.
My understanding of the commission is it's comprised of 10 individuals, 6 women, 3 Jesuits, and 1 lay man, and that they have 3 years. They're charged with a good amount of time to look. We've come quickly to the end of our hour, so I have many more questions, but I want to honor people's time. And as we wrap up our conversation, can I leave you with the hopeful words of Donna Andrade, who is one of those women appointed to the commission.
Yes.
And she's the only person representing the North American continent. And she currently serves as Dean of Mission and Ministry at Fairfield Prep. And this is what Donna shared at the time of her appointment. I have this opportunity only because I stand on the shoulders of giants, other stellar women who have been role models, mentors, friends, and collaborators. I'm blessed to have the kind of colleagues I do and to be able to pursue a vocation that is a calling, not just a profession. It's exciting to me as a Jesuit educator that there are people from all over the world on the commission and that I get to meet them and experience their context. And she continues, all of this is an evolutionary process. My biggest thing is to make sure we don't lose sight of that. And this is the first time questions have been asked in this way, but we can only start to look at it this way because of things that have happened before us historically. My greatest hope for us is that we don't lose sight of our history. So thank you to all of our speakers tonight for grounding us in that graced history and for helping us envision the future. And as we conclude, let's just take a moment in gratitude for all that we have celebrated and hoped for this evening, and conclude with a very short prayer of UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld. For all that has been, thanks, and for all that shall be, yes. Amen. Good evening, everybody, and take care.